Well, now, is the down for school, it's not a charter school. It is. But that's what she's talking about, I guess, is the Union Parish thing, okay, they can do with that.
All right, now we're good.
Well, right now,
It's like the football games, you got the little media guy with the red jacket on, he's like, all right, we're going to commercial. Like, all right, we're back, we can start the game again.
Okay, all right.
they've got a principal up there that hasn't been
Streaming
He's all upset about it. He said, well, he said, if he stays there, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Big.
Right now, I'm getting each of yours different stream, different YouTube streams. But the passage copies, that's 12 over 3 days. So we got a preset on that, and say, all right, oh, put it in there, save it. But, so I'm experimenting. If I sync it up, I can stream it. We're good to go now, guys. Streaming was, but I fixed it now.
Well, I'll tell you what, speaking of that. Now, we don't suspect a thing.
Just went too long. We're behind schedule.
They've been writing little deeds and just learn how to put it.
I won't go as long this time. How's that?
We need to get started. Sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, all these do sit down.
Yeah, you know, I try to never emphasize that on young. It just, learn what you learn and then take the test.
Like, oh, we're not about it.
You don't really. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, you gotta do the deal.
And my girlfriend never hesitated.
Well, some of them will just
Okay, we really have to get started. I'm sorry.
Head them up, boom,
We really,
We gotta work him while he's here.
really. I admire you guys for coming out on Saturday morning and spending your whole morning listening to lectures. I mean,
Learning something.
Steve must have some kind of mind control or something.
He wishes he had.
My wife wouldn't even, my wife would say, "Oh, I got something else to do." Okay, so let's move on then to the royal vocation of the church. Read a couple of scriptures. One we've already heard from 1 Peter 2:9. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood. And then also James 2:8, where James says, if you really fulfill the royal instruction in the scriptures, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You're doing well. There's a hint there that royalty is about love. Being a king is being a loving servant to your people. So and again, let's just deal with this. When we say royalty in America, what do we think of? Okay. What comes to your mind when you hear the word royal or royalty or king? Yeah, mostly a dreadfully flawed kind of view of kingship. If not, the older tyrant kings, then kind of the modern do-nothing kings and queens that live in luxury and don't really have any function anymore. It's like, what do they do? What does Queen Elizabeth do these days? And Americans, we all know that kings and queens are never good. It's a bad form of government. And so our textbooks extol the glories of democracy and remind us of all the abuses of royalty, right? So King Edward II, the Braveheart, the one in Braveheart, William Wallace opposes, and King Henry VIII, and King Louis XVI, and King George III, of course, have to rebel against him. And what happens is we hardly remember the good, wise, just kings in history. The Alfreds, Alfred the Great, or Henry II, or actually King George III is really an interesting guy. Of course, we rebelled against him, but he's complex. He probably went a little crazy later on in life, but he had a lot of good qualities and did a lot of good things. He's the mad king, but before that, he was actually quite just and wise king in many ways. But the problem is good kings don't make interesting subjects for Hollywood movies or HBO series. They're just not interesting. Tyrants make for good TV drama. And why is that? Why is that? Well, three things. Wealth, right? Wealth, power, powerful armies and bloody wars, and then shocking, but somehow very interesting, marital infidelity. Okay, so wealth, power, and adultery, basically, and bad kings engage and have problems with all of those issues. All of those things make for successful and salacious modern TV miniseries, and enormous amounts of gold and blood and sex. Okay. Now, what's interesting about that? Wealth, power, and sex. What's interesting is that this is precisely what God warns Israel against early on, centuries before they would even consider having a king, right? Deuteronomy 17, let me read that. Deuteronomy 17, beginning with verse 14. When you come to the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, and you possess it, and you dwell in it, and then you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom Yahweh your God will choose. Okay, so kingship is not wrong, but I'm going to choose him. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. And now here are the requirements, 3 requirements. Only, he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. So don't multiply horses, war horses. 2, and he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. 3, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. But when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahweh his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. One side comment here, fascinating thing is that when David does become king and a king after God's own heart, we're not told that he actually wrote out this law, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses for himself in a book, but what he did do is he wrote the Psalms. He wrote 5 books of the Psalms as a meditation on the law of God. So we have 5 books of the law written mostly by a king or those he's appointed, and that's a fascinating kind of thing. It's during the royal period of Israel's life that the Psalms were written as a reflection on the law of God. How do Psalms begin? With Psalm 1. How blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked and sits in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of God, and on that law he meditates day and night. So that's just a side comment. But let's think about this. Deuteronomy 17, acquiring too many wives, sex, adultery, and then thirdly, not gaining for themselves excessive silver and gold. So what if we were to reverse engineer this divine warning against royal abuses and ask them, okay, what would a good king be like? Think about that for a minute in terms of gold, power, and passion. What we get is, one, a good king would be one that uses wealth to enrich others. Okay? Uses wealth to enrich others. Two, a royalty that uses power. Okay? Uses power. All kings are going to have power. But uses power to shepherd and protect his subjects. And then three, a royalty that reserves his passionate love for his people rather than dissipating it on a harem. Okay, so use wealth to enrich others, use your power to shepherd and protect your people, and pour out your passions on your people. Well, of course, on your wife, but also on your people. And you can sum all of this up in one word. It's love. It's wise love. Maybe three, wise, protective love. And that's what characterizes a godly king, wise, protective love. Think about David and Solomon. Okay? Wealth. David used wealth to enrich people. He built, or he at least put together the plans for a temple. He builds a city. Okay, it's interesting also that the kings had these fields, and that they used the products of these fields to feed people. Remember, David had a large table in which he fed people at. So did Solomon. Okay, in fact, just one of the things that David does is he invites Mephibosheth to sit at his table, and he feeds him. Okay, so he's using his wealth to enrich others. In Ezekiel 34, when there's a promise of a future shepherd, because the shepherds in Israel at this time are doing so poorly, the kings and rulers, God says, I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them. Be resurrected, but the greater David will come. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. So a shepherd king is one who uses wealth to feed sheep. What about power? Well, David slays a lot of people. David uses power. David has slain his tens of thousands and Saul his thousands, but they're enemies of the people of God. It's, of course, David who finally gets peace for the people of God by destroying the enemies of God. The Philistines are hamstrung by David and no longer are a threat to the Israelites. The only way to achieve peace when there are enemies involved is that they be vanquished. Okay? That's still true today. Okay? If you have enemies, they've got to be vanquished. They've got to be, you've got to win the battle against them. Otherwise, they'll just keep coming back, which is what happened with the Philistines at the time of Saul and until David came along. So wealth and power and passion. Okay? The shepherd king has a passion for his people, and that passion translates into poetry, beautified, glorified speech, the Psalms. And And actually, before Solomon and his harem, you have the Song of Songs. And the Song of Songs, as I said last night, is about political eros, political passion, not lust, but an emotional kind of love and connection between the king and his people. Remember, in the Song of Solomon, you have Solomon depicted in architectural temple imagery, the imagery of the palace. And you have the people depicted with the imagery of the land, okay, with animals, flora, and fauna. And what's going on there is you have the union, almost, well, it's marital union is the symbolism, the union between the palace and the people, between the palace of the king and the land, between the king and his people, his bride, and they're united. And any ruler, any governor, any president has to have a passion for his people. All right, so think about our King, the man, Jesus, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Oh, I should say this before. Think about what happens with Solomon when he goes bad, right? So he multiplies wives, okay, and they lead him astray, they lead his heart astray. He multiplies horses, war horses, and he's amassing power. And then he also amasses wealth, lots and lots of gold and silver, 666 talents of silver, which then becomes a symbol of Israel's beastly fall in Revelation 13. Okay, that number 666 goes right back to 1 Kings 10, and it's about Solomon. Solomon went bad, and Israel in the first century goes bad in the same way. So now think about our King. Think about Jesus, the greater David, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Is he rich? Yeah. Is he powerful? Yeah. Is he passionate? Yeah. Okay. But he's wise about his riches. He feeds the multitude. He has the wealth to be able to do anything he wants to do, and yet he feeds multitudes. And remember Herod and Jesus in Mark 6, they're contrasted in Mark 6. Herod is the wolf king, and he feeds on the choicest sheep, which is John the Baptist. And Jesus is the shepherd king. He's the greater David. And he sits people down on the green grass and feeds them like a true king, okay? This is one of the problems in the Gospels, is that the rulers, those who rule, those who have kingly authority in Israel, they become envious. They recognize they're being shown up, and they just want to kill him. They want to get rid of him. Though he was rich, what's the rest of that verse? Though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor, that we through his poverty might become rich. That's very kingly attitude and behavior. So Jesus uses riches wisely and in the service of his people, not just to amass riches for himself. Yeah, and again, you have this story in, what is it, Luke 11? I think that's Luke 11, of the man who, the wealthy man who builds all these barns, and he keeps piling up grain and stores it away, and he says to his soul, "Now, soul, you have everything you need. Eat, drink, and marry, relax." And the Lord says, "This very day I require your soul from you," and he dies. And who then gets that? Well, that's a story about Israel. Israel has hoarded all the gifts, all the treasures that God has given her, including the gold and silver in the temple, but everything else she's hoarded. And at the time of Jesus, Israel is not using her wealth, whether it's physical wealth or ritual wealth or wealth of knowledge, to serve anyone. She's turned inward. Okay, she's built barns and kept everything to herself and not sharing anything. That's one of the big problems in the story of the first century, is how Israel has misused the wealth that God has given them. So in the book of James, which is also has full of royal themes here and is connected with the Gospel of Mark, especially Mark and James, probably written near the same time. And remember in James chapter 5, James writes, and he's referring to the Israelites here. He's not just referring to individual kind of plantation owners that are scattered across the land. He's referring to Israel and to the leaders in Israel and to Jerusalem. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted. Your garments are moth-eaten. Okay, remember the temple is a gold and silver storehouse, and it's full. It's very glorious. And remember, the priests have garments of glory that they wear, and so do the elders. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You've laid up treasure in the last days. This is not about the end of the world. This is about the last days of Israel. And they've laid up treasure. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of armies. Now, this is all language that's directly taken from the ministry of Jesus when he talks about harvest and workers, and these are the apostles, these are the Christians that are sent out to harvest, and no one in Israel is killing them, and they're going to suffer for it. That's what this all is. It's all about. You have lived in self-indulgence. You have a day of condemned. You've even murdered the righteous one, and he did not resist you. Okay, so in their ruling, it got so bad that they, out of envy, they killed Jesus in order to maintain their own power and status. So that's not good. Jesus is wise about his riches, and he feeds the multitude. What about power? Jesus is powerful. He has all power in heaven and on earth, as he tells us in the Great Commission. What does he use that power to do? Protect and shepherd his people. In Mark chapter 10, remember, I think it's James and John, come to Jesus and they say, hey, we want you to do for us whatever we ask you. And Jesus says, well, what do you want me to do for you? And they say, we want you, when you come into your kingdom, to put one of us on your right hand and your left hand so we can rule with you. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. And they say, oh, yeah, we do. And Jesus says, are you able to be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? And they say, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah. Well, and Jesus says, you will be baptized with the baptism of baptism. But for me, but to rule at my right and left, that's not my prerogative. That's the Father who decides that thing. And then Jesus goes on and says, the lords and the kings of the Gentiles, they lord it over people, and they love to rule that way. And it won't be that way in the new kingdom. But the greatest among you will be the servant. Okay? The one who gets exalted will be the one who is the best servant of all. That's Mark 10. Okay? We're not going to do it the old way anymore. In fact, Israel has mimicked, in mimetic rivalry, Rome, and thinks that that's the way to rule. That's why Israel was looking for a great conquering Caesar-like Messiah, because they're mimicking Rome. They wanted to be like Rome. They were envious of Rome. They hated Rome because Rome had all the power. That's why they're always in insurrection and rebels. That's why there are all these insurrectionists that are in prison. And Pilate releases one of them for the Jews. They'd rather have him because they hate Rome. They want power for the wrong reasons, and they're using power for the wrong ends. And Jesus often instructs his disciples not to avoid power and authority, Okay? He doesn't repudiate all power and authority, but he redefines how authority is to be used. Okay? And it's a call to use power to serve. Okay? And so Jesus, in Philippians 2, is said to have poured out his life unto death. And that's why God exalts him and gives him a name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow. Okay? And that's our model then for kingly, royal service, power, authority, wherever we have it, wherever the church is given that kind of power. The third thing, you think about Jesus, not only how he uses his wealth, how he uses his power, but his passion. We have a hymn that I don't particularly like. I don't know that I like the music or not. The deep, deep love of Jesus. And it kind of always just kind of grates on me. But, I mean, it's true. I mean, you guys love that one or something? Did I just step in it? Oh, yeah. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, boundless freedom. I'm swimming in it. I'm drowning in it, and all that kind of stuff. Rolling over me. You know, okay, whatever. That's fine. I am. Some of these hymns just drive me crazy. It's like, even so, even though that hymn can be corny in places, it's true. I mean, Jesus, the Son of God, has this deep, deep love for us. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, and Jesus loved us so much that he died for us. He died for his bride, Ephesians 5, you know. He has compassion on the masses. Why? Because they're like sheep without a kingly shepherd. And here he comes, being the kingly shepherd who loves. And there's all these passages where Jesus is approached by someone, or he sees someone. He says he looked on them with compassion. So that his motivation to heal, to restore, is love. It's a deep kind of love. Okay, and so then what we have in Jesus is the epiphany of true royalty and kingship. Okay, now here and there in the record of Scripture, the Hebrew Scriptures, you have at times certain people who stand out as being godly rulers. Joseph, David, Solomon at times early on and later on. But even their failures are a foil for the final revelation of genuine lordship and the royal office fulfilled perfectly in the life, death, and reign of King Jesus, the new Adam. So now you know where this is going. It's beyond dispute that God created Adam and Eve to rule. They have a royal vocation, take dominion over all the earth. And since now Jesus has elevated us to rule and reign with him, I think the basic outline of our royal vocation is pretty evident. It's all about using the amazing gifts of God, how he has intended them to be used, whether it's wealth and prosperity, or power and authority, or emotional passion and love. Okay? So let's think about what this means for our mission as a church. Wealth and riches. Wealth and riches. Well, I'll come back to that. There's an awful lot of instruction in the kingly wisdom literature about the use of wealth, isn't there? Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, because kings administer a lot of wealth. And that all is not easily summarized. I can't just put it into a few commandments. The priests have it all lined out for them in Leviticus. Remember, priests have a very straightforward kind of charge and instructions. Kings, on the other hand, have to use their judgment and discernment in using the wealth that God gives them. They have to decide how best to use it to serve others, okay? How are we going to do this? It's in our session meetings, when elders get together and talk about things, we often talk about money, of course, because we're given all these tithes and offerings, and we have to make decisions about how to use that money wisely. And there's one elder in particular in my church who's now elder emeritus, but he still attends. He's kind of an assistant to the pastor. He's really very valuable to me. And I can predict what he's going to say whenever we have any excess wealth, any excess prosperity. He will always say, let's not, someone will inevitably say, well, let's put it in our Schwab account, which is kind of the account that we use to just save money for, a day when we might need it, and then and that Schwab account keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He will always say, no. Which of our missionaries needs this right now? Okay. God has given this, let's use it to serve someone else. And then, the more business-minded elders always go, yeah, do we really want to do that? Yeah, and so we write this big old, that's the right. What's it all for? Okay, why do we do this? Why do we have authority in when God gives you a position? Maybe it's wealth, it's intellectual gifts. How are you going to use that in your household or in your business, in your city? Our royal calling takes us outside of the church into the world and then we're required, Mark 10, to serve others well. Okay? Right? Use our wealth to serve others. And the ironic thing is when you do that, then you normally get wealthier. Okay? If power flows to those who use their power to serve others. Wealth flows to use their wealth to serve others. That's just the way it works. Apart from sin, of course, that comes in. So that's the first thing. The church needs to think through how we use the wealth. We are given power to empower. Talk of God's omnipotence, apart from Jesus and the cross, it's always a little bit dangerous to God apart from Jesus, his son, because that can lead people to a despot. With revelation to serve. God used his power to empower. God is not this, and this is a problem also with the kind of Reformed slogan that God does all things for his own glory. And there's a sense in which that's just not true. Actually, what God does all things to share his glory. That's in the Westminster Confession, I think it's chapter 2, where they use both. That God has all life and glory and blessedness in and of himself, and is alone in and unto himself all sufficient, not standing in need of any of the creatures he has made, nor deriving any glory from them, but only manifesting his own glory. I can't believe I remember that. I'm getting old and I actually remember that. And it's not in my notes. Okay. So what we need to be careful about that. God is not just this God who has to suck up all the glory for himself. What he does is he glorifies other people. And his glory is revealed in the way he shares that glory with others. Okay. And in our sin, when we're not following God's lead on this, we try to make ourselves appear glorious by cutting other people down. We want other people to be small and little and ugly and impoverished so that we can build ourselves up. That's a very sinful way of responding to people. Rather, and I face this temptation as a pastor when I have assistants or associates, and then all of a sudden I sense there's a rivalry and who's the better preacher, who's the better teacher, who's the better leader, who's the better pastor, and all of a sudden I feel like, okay, I got to put this person down so that I can shine before the congregation, and they know that I'm the best preacher, and I'm the best teacher, and I'm the best leader, and he's not. Well, what happened, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to develop people so that they come up to your level and surpass you. And when you do that, I think as Christians, we understand that's a godly kind of thing to do. That's what God does. He raises us up. He lifts us up. He glorifies us. He beautifies us. He gives us all these gifts. He puts us in places of power. Okay? He doesn't just make us crawl and before him. Now, we do have to get in the dust when we sin and confess before him. But God doesn't just make us crawl in the dust like worms all the time. He actually makes us stand up and robes us and crowns us. And yeah, okay. I got off on a little preaching rant there. So his power. He's not a divine despot. One of the major problems with the church in Corinth was they rightly knew they were kings and they ruled, but they were not behaving as royal Christians. And what Paul does is stress the wisdom of God revealed in the cross. And again, it's kingly talk. Jesus was recognized in the Gospel of Mark. It starts off saying that Jesus is the Son of God, which is a royal title. It's all about kingly stuff. Jesus, remember, is contrasted with Herod, and who's the wolf king, and he's the shepherd king. And when they come to the end of the line, Jesus is only confessed by one human. It's a Roman centurion. He says, when he saw how Jesus died, didn't just see that he died, but he saw the manner in which Jesus died, which clearly means that he understood that Jesus was giving himself, that he was voluntarily dying, that no one was taking his life. He was giving. The centurion says, truly this is, the Son of God. Truly this is royalty. So it's the cross. Christ crucified is the wisdom from the Spirit. And so in the Corinthian church, there has to be unity. There has to be love. Remember 1 Corinthians 13? You can have all these wonderful gifts, but if you have not love, they're nothing. Okay? And they're not able to adjudicate grievances in their community, 1 Corinthians 6, because there's no one wise enough to do that, because there's not enough love. They're using their power in the wrong way. It's all through the book of 1 Corinthians. There should be no divisions in the body, because in royal vision, everybody's unified. Okay, love is the most important spiritual gift. Okay, power is used to protect and guard God's people and to bring them together. Think about King David. God had given David powerful gifts. David used that power to kill Goliath. Okay? Why did he do that? Because Goliath was an enemy of God's people and needed to be brought down, and that brought victory to the people of God. Okay? David used his power to destroy the hegemony that the Philistines had over Israel for a century or more. And that was good. He slayed his tens of thousands. And that's a good use of power, because it was power used in protection of God's people. Okay, and this has always been the Christian vision, is that there's nothing wrong with use of violence and power and deadly force in protecting ourselves, our families, our communities, and our nation. Okay, we had a Sunday school class this last week where one of the professors at Covenant Seminary came and taught on the life of Francis Schaeffer, the life and thought of Francis Schaeffer. It was a really good lecture. And at one point in the question and answer session, one of the people in church asked the professor, because of something he said, I can't remember what it was Francis Schaeffer a pacifist? And I'll never forget the answer. The professor just turned on the guy and said, absolutely not. Pacifism is a Christian heresy. I'm like, cool. I didn't expect that from him. He's such a soft-spoken kind of guy. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly right. It is. But of course, we're not warmongers, and we don't enjoy the use of force, especially deadly force, but we use it to protect God's people. And the church has power as well, and the church uses that power in a good way, not to harm people, but to build them up, to protect people, to excommunicate and keep offenders, all sorts of things we could say about that. In 2 Corinthians 13:10, Paul says that he's writing these things to the Corinthians, being absent, lest being present I should use sharpness according to the power which the Lord has given me. According to the power which the Lord has given me to edification and not to destruction. So that even when Paul is intent on exercising his authority as an apostle to deal with problems in the Corinthian church, he understands that it's not to destroy, but to edify, to build up. Okay? Okay. So using power, administering power and authority in communities with wisdom, deciding cases, making rules. And the kings also had to make rules that weren't explicitly in the law, but are applications of the law. You build on the law, you learn the law, but then and this is true for us as children. We talked about this, children going through these stages. Children learn the law, but then when they get older, they have to learn how to apply the law and mature into kings, basically. Okay, so and then the third thing, that's about power. Then the third and last thing is passion. All of these are interrelated, obviously, but this is the hardest one maybe to specify because it can't really be logically enumerated. And we're not used to thinking this way because we're used to thinking about positions of authority, especially in the civil realm, as being really just kind of bureaucratic positions and impersonal authority. I mean, if anything, in our day and age with the centralization of power in federal government, all of rule and authority has become very impersonal. It's all about reams of federal law or tax code. It's very impersonal. But in the Bible, rule is personal, which is why as most Christian scholars and thinkers have been on the right of the left-right perspective in saying that power is much better managed and much more susceptible to being used properly when it's local, when you know the guy, when you can relate to the guy, when it's not just way up there and out there. Again, I mentioned the Song of Songs, which is about political eros. It's something we need to think about more, that pastors have a passion for their people, okay? That owners of a business have a passion for their employees, okay? And that's why they're using their wealth to enrich these employees and to help them serve others. All this is connected together, and it's all connected together by love. How do you rule your household? You've got wealth, you've got power, but if you have wealth and have power as a man, let's say, as a husband, well, if you don't have passion, if you don't have love, what's that? You're going to have a really awful household. Okay, you can run everything just right. You can come up with all just the right rules for your house. It's not going to go well. You've got to have a passion for your wife and a passionate love for your children. In the church, one of the things also that happens under this category, I think, is the beautification of our environment. You can ordinarily tell if you have let's just go back to the family for a minute. If you go into a house, as I make a pastoral visit in a house, I don't want to make this too categorical here, but I'll just say it. You go into a house and it's just not well kept, and there's nothing that's been beautified in the house. And of course, I'm not talking about somebody who just moved in or someone who's a new couple that don't have a lot of money. But if there's a sense that something's ugly about the house, you can pretty sure that there's also some problems and ugliness in the marriage and in the family. It doesn't mean that you have to deck out your house with all the most expensive things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something else. You beautify your home. We beautify the place of worship. Solomon, as a king, glorifies the tabernacle into a stone temple, and it makes everything bigger and more beautiful and more significant, more weighty, more glorious. He glorifies the land as well, not just his own palace and temple, but the land is glorified and beautified. And that's a function of royalty, is to beautify the environment of those that we rule, glorifying the people. And the Psalms are glorified words, glorified law. David creates musical instruments so that now worship is not just spoken, and not just sung, but it's sung with musical instruments, which is even more glorious and beautiful and engaging and weighty. So that now you have all these Levites who are trained, and when the congregation gathers, they're not just hearing their voices, but they're hearing these musical instruments. It all comes in with David and royalty. He trains. Now it's not just that the priests are training people how to enter into God's presence, but now the kings are coming along and glorifying that process and beautifying it. Okay? You can always worship God simply, but the kings understand that you want to worship God gloriously. And so that's also something we ought to have a desire for, is glorious environments in worship, glorious accompaniment of worship, glorious words in worship. There is a sense in which there's an upper register to words in liturgy that's not just common. We don't call God dude and things like that. There's an upper register here. The words not just flowery and archaic and antiquarian. Again, we're not doing a historical reenactment in worship, but we do want to have words that are appropriate for entering God's, words that are beautiful, sentence structures that are well constructed, and hymns that are poetic in the best sense of the word. That's all, and that's a kingly function. That's what kings do. Okay, so Steve, hand out that last thing, and I'm running out of time again, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have you hand it out and then we'll stop. Otherwise, Jared's going to start making hand motions back there, having some kind of a charismatic experience. And then I'll come back, and before we start the next section, I'll just go over that briefly, but you can look at that. Okay, so you're dismissed for 30 seconds.